Claudia. Hi.
Oh my god. Hey,
Friends.
hi y'all. Hey, what's up? Also,
How are you?
I I've I haven't had like a day, but like I've had a morning. Unrelated to my morning, I just realized I'm in white and you're in black. Yin and yang, we.
It's so fitting.
It'd be like
Like
that.
it is.
Also, sorry that I was bombarding you for the entire day with messages. I feel bad, especially knowing how busy your day was. So I apologize 100%.
I didn't feel bombarded at all.
Oh, I felt like I was bombarding you more than usual. I apologize. But anyway, so let me tell you about my mother. This morning, one of my cats, he's been having some like seizure episodes, fairly ish new. So had to take him to the neurologist today. And here in New York, it was downpouring. And I don't know what anybody knows about cats and water, but most of them despise water. And so I was trying to be a great mother to my cat and remembered to bring an umbrella. Granted, it wasn't the good umbrella because I lost that at a happy hour. And so
Never forget.
never forget. Although I ordered a new one, I'm pretty sure I left it on my new Amazon order. So it's coming tomorrow. Anyway, so I had this really janky purple umbrella with me, and mom was picking me up because Keith was at work. Rightfully so. We have to pay for the kitty somehow. My mom has an aversion to rain. And
Like a
so,
cat.
much like a cat, I've never put that two into like those two things together. Like, I've never seen the correlation. Everything makes more sense now. Everything makes way more sense now. Thank you. So, anyway, I'm at my door and like there's a long kind of like, for lack of a better term, runway to the curb. And so again, raining. My cat that I'm taking is like 19 pounds. So he's a chunk. He's a chunky little man. And it's raining and I have this janky umbrella and so I'm like trying to bolt. And my mother makes eye contact with me. I see her through the chaos that I have in both hands. And I thought that it would be common sense. Oh, my daughter needs help. Shit, let me get out of the car. You know what this woman does? Stares at me. Just stares at me. Then, at one point, looks forward as if she doesn't see me.
The
Ma'am,
drama is so thick.
ma'am. Again, it is pouring at this point. And this poor cat, I'm like trying to maneuver and everything. So then I open it and then I place him down. I said, "Thank you so much for your help." And she goes, "It's raining." And I said, "No shit. No shit. It's raining." So then I sit down in the car and I just look at her and she goes, "What?" And I go, "Ma, my hands were full. What third arm did you think I was going to get to open the door?" She goes, "But you didn't, no?" I said, "That's not the point, mother. There was a time delay and rain." She goes, "Exactly. There was rain, ma'am."
Oh. How was your kitty?
Oh, he's good. I mean, he's fine. He was
In
like,
this situation
oh,
and
in
then
this
after the
situation, I
because it
think.
was
Mm,
thunder isolated T storms was actually the weather forecast. So
you're right, but at that point there wasn't any thunder, or like there was like a little like wolfy rumble, and that's about it. Like that's really what it sounded like, but it wasn't like a boom.
so he was okay on this wet runway situation.
Thank God.
Waiting.
Thank God he was. I went to pet him when we got in, like because it has like holes on the side, and so I went like this, and I was like, "Oh no, I found the little wet part. Poor baby."
They hold grudges. Watch out. Watch your shoes.
Oh girl, I already know. I already know that he hates me. Like he just stared at me like, "Wow. Wow, mom. You took me to not one, but two different vets in less than a week. That's fucked up. We're not friends." And Keith was like, "Babe, I'm sure he doesn't hate you." I'm like, "No, no. I looked at him.
I'm an empath.
He I'm an empath. I know." I'm crying. Oh my god. So yeah, that was my morning. So girl, how was your day?
It was good. I felt restricted because of the forecast. I'm, I guess, like a cat and like your mom, where I don't like rain in any semblance, any precipitation. I just will find reasons to stay inside. And I'm an outdoor girl. I like being in the sun, but that's like the condition. It has to be sunny or like partly cloudy.
So you've
Um,
been outside for with clouds.
yeah, clouds are fine. And there's, I still got the SPF no matter what it is.
Avi.
But yeah, so I just kept trying to find like reasons to steal a moment outside. So just before we went on this hunt for a missing credit card, which was found under a pile of clothes, and on this journey we went and got cold brew from this place, but shy guy, he wanted an espresso shot. The rocket fuel that was pressed for no reason from like a boba snack place was so insane that I ended up, he poured half of his espresso into my cold brew, so I got a red eye.
Oh.
When I tell you I flew down the block, we were just like, and I think that's why we found the card ultimately, because like executive functions all lined up, like
Of course.
memory, all of it was just like we could see into the fifth dimension. So you know who else doesn't like the rain? Actually, the dog, who
That's
is a
why
cat.
he's a cat.
So look at that. It's just like a family of kitties.
Like
An
honestly,
extended found family.
all of us just own cat dogs. I'm convinced.
And I'm apparently one too, and I never even thought about cats a day in my life until recently.
You're welcome.
Oh.
Until I'm bombarded you with, look at this cat just begging me for food.
Look at this cat, isn't it neat?
Look at this void, isn't it cute?
A void? No, he's not a void. He's just
Yes, he is. Girl, he is a black cat. He is a void.
Thereby. Laws of
Thereby,
physics say
void.
crying.
Neil
Probably.
Tyson Grasson, Neil
DeGrasse Tyson?
DeGrasse Tyson.
Grasson-Tasson. Neil Grasson-Tasson.
Well, we found
Wow.
the Slippy part of it. Are you making it too?
He definitely, like, you know how scholars transcend epochs?
Mhm.
That is a statement. So like him, Da Vinci, Johannes von Gutenberg, printing press, all of them, they just relate on the same plane. So that's like our cast.
Hold on, what did you say? What?
The has nothing to at all to do with today's conversation. Like couldn't be less related to today's conversation. The like the transcending plane of epochs, I don't know. I can when I get we're at about 14 minutes.
We'll
So
just say
before
the
14 minutes.
transcendent. Well, there'll be something added to it. Just the transcendent.
Oh my god, to relate back. Oh, this is our genre. That works. Oh, that's look at that. Look at us.
Who would have thought?
Not that Neil Grasson-Tasson or Johannes von Printing Press are the genre. They're characters in our genre of
We're besties.
They're besties in the genre of it's like satirical kind of, but like educational satire. Like we'll get to it. So I guess hello everyone, welcome to July. Can you believe it's July already?
No, I can't. Well, I mean, future
It's not.
future us. For future us, it will be like when you guys hear this, it'll be July. For us, right now, it's June.
Yeah,
but it's okay. They can know the secret.
Don't you love that we care so much about all of you and this like channel that we're out here doing work a month in advance? Isn't that amazing?
I mean, look at us.
The commitment.
Crazy. You're welcome.
The planning.
Even more important than us looking out for y'all, it is Disability Pride Month. So I feel like with all Pride months and awareness related month, there's usually something groundbreaking that happens during that month that signifies that, hey, this is the start of it.
Yeah, it is Disability Pride Month, and it's celebrated every July in the States because July marks the anniversary of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Mhm.
This was a landmark legislation that broke down barriers to inclusion in American society. Are there more barriers that need to be broken down?
Hell yeah.
A skillion every single day. There's so many, I mean, in every way. In fact,
Well,
I think that ADA was only passed in the last like 50 years or
I
less.
believe it was 1990.
It was passed in 19 1990.
So it's in its Jesus year, y'all. Ooh, actually, not even officially, not even officially, because it's June on our
It's
end, but future.
June. This month of July, we would like to celebrate the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which fights and actually it prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities, employment,
Correct.
transportation, education, et cetera, et cetera. And this month is meant to just bring attention to celebrating human differences that occur, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's whether it is a congenital, which means at birth, developmental, or it's something that you do actually acquire from an injury over time.
Mm-hmm.
We are all humans, and that is the agenda for the ADA: is to make sure everything is accessible to everyone, every body, every mind.
Regardless of any differences that we may have.
So it's in its Jesus year, as you pointed out, which means the ADA is turning 33. We just wanted to spotlight the stories that are told from this perspective, kind of address privilege disparities,
Mm-hmm.
identities that go with this kind of experience, and create any safe space, create safety and inclusion for anybody who it feels like they don't have any in their lives.
In addition to that, we will be reading Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert, which includes a number of terms ranging from different points of views that we need to talk about to microaggressions. And quite frankly, we got a lot of ground to cover. And I figured you guys could just grab a snack, maybe a cute little drinky drink, no judgment on what time it is when you're listening, as we dive into our explaining episode.
It's time to explain. So, our protagonist is Chloe Brown, and the story takes place mostly from her perspective, which we will talk about first.
Mm.
As a preview, in case you're not sure if you want to read along with us this month, this book is about a main character, our protagonist, Chloe Brown, and she does live with invisible chronic pain. And the genre of this book is actually a romance novel, and we'll talk a lot about why that's really important, especially given the context of kind of the life that this character lives. So that's all we're going to say about the plot, and I think in general about like the characters and stuff, like from a plot unwinding perspective.
So we're going to be very mysterious. If anything, you're probably going to get a few more bullet points from about the book in the book club post. So
True. So just like we did for Cerulean Sea, we are just going to point out a couple of things we want you to either have the definitions or understanding of before you jump into this book, if you choose to read it with us this month. Okay?
Because we acknowledge it's been a while since you've been in school, maybe, or maybe you're still in school and you need a refresher, and that's totally fine, regardless. Either way, we're making it accessible. First things first, when you talk about point of view, I know that many of you, are on Instagram or on TikTok, and you always see those POV.
Pav.
POV, you're doing this. First of all, you don't know my life. Second, how did you know? But essentially, it stands for point of view. And another synonym for that, I would say, is narration. And so in this book, there tends to be a shift in narration. And, how can you figure out when there is a shift in a point of view, when there isn't something clearly stated at the top that there is a change? Because if you remember with Neon Gods, every chapter was labeled like who, if I'm not right, I'm not crazy.
You are correct. And Game of Thrones too, when there are a lot of
Mhm.
Pav changes.
Yes,
If you've read that.
and I was digging really deep regarding point of view. And I'm only going to cover two of the main versions of point of view, honestly, because they are, again, the two that you will most commonly see. So, first person point of view, it's named solely for like the pronouns that are used. And so, like, when we're talking about first person, we're talking about the pronouns. So, I, me, mine. So, if I am writing a first person narrative, it's going to be in my perspective. So, I will be using all of these pronouns. And usually it's like a character that's inside of the story. You can read their thoughts and their feelings, but they can't necessarily, like if Christina is in my story, I'm not going to know exactly what she's thinking. I'm not going to know exactly what she's feeling. I can imagine because, I'm an empath. But that's as far as I can go. I'm not like digging deep into her thoughts and her feelings because it's my perspective, it's my POV. And oftentimes, this type of narration is seen as very unreliable because you're only getting one side of the situation.
Right, like there's three sides to every argument or every story we say. If you're only getting the one, then you don't know really what's happening in everyone else's POV perspective.
Correct, girly. Not Shy Guy going, POV? I just heard paw. So, one example of first person narration would be The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. It is told through the lens of Nick Carraway, who is basically Daisy's cousin and also is Gatsby's friend. But even then, he only knows things through secondhand because it's not his thoughts and stuff that he's talking about. He's actually telling us about like Gatsby and Daisy. But anyway, he is solely an observer of that story.
Ooh, I like that you said that, like an observer. So he only sees what he gets, right? And he's left to do his own psychoanalysis of his friends.
Correct. Even though he's not certified, he shouldn't even be thinking about that, but whatever.
Facts. Remember that, everyone.
Again, with that one in mind, he is constantly utilizing I, and so the I that you will see coming up is always talking about Nick's perspective, not Gatsby's, despite what everyone freaking thinks. It's not all about Gatsby.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a powerful plot device in that particular story because Gatsby is such a mystery, like an alluring, mysterious, like a powerhouse that nobody understands. So to have someone else telling the story of Gatsby and his decline is really powerful and really caters to that aura that he casts, the shadow he casts over East and West Egg.
Yes, look at that memory. Ow.
We normally skip over the second person perspective. I don't really think I've ever read anything. That would be like an angry letter to a lover. You!
Or I would say self-help.
Yeah, chicken soup for the soul. Definitely.
Maybe not necessarily chicken soup, mainly
Girl,
because
I never read those.
Girl, I did. I was a sucker. But I borrowed it from the library. Never bought that. Actually, maybe one, because, Scholastic Book Fair.
Oh, yeah.
It just hit. Anyway.
But even in just describing where you might see them, you can see why that's not the most common. It's a little awkward and it's very directed at the reader. So the writer is using the you pronoun, directing it straight at you who's reading it. So then, therefore, the third person grammatically is told from the third person's perspective. So we're using pronouns, we're using names, and there's a removal of the protagonist or whoever the main character is from the narration. How different would Gatsby have been if Nick weren't telling the story from his own perspective? If there was a narrator, maybe we would have had less Nick and more everyone else.
I think it, but also Nick was so obsessed with Gatsby. But anyway.
Oh my God.
But
that's why it was so good to do it from Nick's perspective. Because you really got to see that infatuation.
Yeah.
So the third person, the narrator, basically, which traditionally, a lot of stories are written from this perspective. It's very flexible for the author because you can choose to tell the story through a lot of characters. You can get into people's minds to share these different character perspectives to create like a fuller narration. But the narrator themselves is usually not part of the story, at least in like books, like in literature. right?
There's only, so kind of,
In
because,
theater, they are, right? It's
yeah.
a character who, like last night.
uh, uh, if you saw, you saw. But anyway, yes and no, only because, like, if you think about, well, what is it? The Book Thief? Technically, it's, so there are three types of third person narration. One of them is omniscient, and meaning that it's like godlike. And so, although it is told by Death, because Death is essentially godlike and knows, flashbacks of like and memories of a character, or like, all these things about different characters and all these characters, that's why the Book Thief, for example, would be considered an omniscient narrator. So essentially, you're telling, the story is being told in a way that's only reflecting at least like one character from like a bird's eye view. Sometimes you'll have multiple characters' thoughts and feelings and experiences. And so it kind of shifts around at some point, but with subjective points of view, it's like, again, it's a shifting kind of idea, but you're still getting that like lens of somewhat godlike of like one character at a time, because it's focusing on a subject. Then the last one would be objective. And so similar-ish to first person narrative, it's like you're reporting on what you see, but again, that particular like point of view isn't necessarily a full-on character of the actual like story, if that makes sense. So like if you think about the lottery, the way that it's told, it's like you're almost like a reporter. Like it's reporting on what is being seen. There are no thoughts, there are no feelings. You're just reporting it as it is, which is why it's different from the first person narrative, because you are getting at least one person's like thoughts and feelings on the page. Whereas with this one, it's like you're more of an onlooker. You're looking at things objectively.
Would you say journalism is objective third person? It is third
Now,
person for the most part.
yes, the only like two exceptions I would say to that in journalism would be one, interviews. Like if
Mm.
it's like a Q&A type of style, then it won't necessarily be a third person unless it's like the intro. The the other thing that I would say is that it's very hard to find objective journalism, because everyone has an opinion, even if, again, news reporters will say that they don't have an opinion depending on what outlet they're writing for, sometimes will dictate where they sway
Mm, mm, mm.
and how they present something, which is why points of view are very, very important. Because if you think about points of view, and I'm sorry if it's political, depending on what media source you utilize, you're only getting one side of the story rather than getting a holistic view of an issue. Which is why I think there is so many issues. That's all I'm gonna say on that.
Look at you solving world peace in a podcast.
But also attempting to be problematic while still stating a problematic thing.
um, Not me in the middle of talking, moving a whole section to another point in the story. In the story, listen to me.
It'd be like that. I mean, we're
Yeah.
storytelling here.
Okay, I fixed it. All right. I just
Uh,
thought the themes fit after we talk about everything else.
Meow meow. Meow meow meow. Meow. I love it.
So perfect. Okay, well, thanks for clarifying that. So as far as POV goes in this story, what should everyone be looking out for while they're reading?
You should look for shifts and points of view, between, at least at this point, because I'm about almost halfway through. I would say between two characters. I don't know if there will be another one. And also based off of the context clues that I read, I surmised that it takes place in London, or at least in England.
Same.
because of the dialects that are being utilized within both perspectives.
100%.
Although it was a little dodgy for me at one point because
Dodgy.
dolce, if you will, oh God, our overseas friends are gonna cringe.
Sorry, overseas friends.
Love you. He already told me, he's like, you realize that in British we have T's, right? When I said bottle, he's like, you can say T's, they exist. And I'm like, I
Bottle.
hate you. Bottle. And then he's like, fine, that's acceptable. I said, great, thank you.
The Cockney speaking character in this book would say bottle, probably, though.
Likely, likely.
Hashtag phonology.
You're welcome, overseas friend. You know who you are. Um, and because originally I thought only one of them. So I created this whole story, like in my mind, in the first like 2 or 3 chapters. I was like, oh my God, Chloe is an American. Part of her getting a life is studying abroad in the UK because I only saw the dialect in the other point of view. And then I saw the dialects come up in hers, and I said,
Uh,
never mind.
I think there were other explicit mentions of being in the UK aside from the like
Yes.
language style, but
I'm talking like
again,
first like couple chapters.
we talked about setting a few weeks ago, so you know how to look at or look out for clues to the setting. But this is meant to definitely take place in a real, relatable world for many reasons.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And it
Mhm.
is very realistic in that sense. We're dealing with some real problems here.
So sometimes it's hard to convey problems. It's hard to convey, right? So like when you're reading a text, you're looking at words, right? But humans, we have five senses, and none of them
Mhm.
are reading.
No,
Our five senses include vision and sensations like smell, other sensations like smell, taste, touch, right?
correct.
Hearing. So when you're reading, authors like to convey these deep, dark, or high, bright feelings through imagery.
Hmm.
And that is, as English teachers like Claudia would tell you, is painting a picture with words.
Indeed.
Um, as multi-sensory as the picture can get. So you can really, as a reader, buy in to what's being sold.
Especially if there are some describers of like smells, different types of food. Because in case you didn't know, one of the senses, smell, helps develop a memory. And so maybe if you are aware of that smell, maybe it develops memory and a connection for you, and it gives you further investment in what you're reading.
Yeah, like last night when we were out, this woman was walking in front of us, and I didn't mention this because it's a trigger. There's a perfume
Mhm.
that some older women wear that immediately transports me to my first grade teacher, and she was evil. And so every time I smell it, like my heart seizes up. We were in Times Square, so that didn't help at all.
Not to bring up trauma, was it like a rosy kind of feel?
It is like a powdery floral,
Okay.
and like sometimes perfumes smell different when different people wear them.
Yeah.
This one always smells the same, and I'm always like, that's her. It sees up, and I'm just like, stiff, stiff. Okay, we're past it now. But like it was
Trauma.
wafting. Yeah, she was evil. That's all I'm gonna say.
You know who you are. Anyway.
So yeah, that is an olfactory memory, and it'll transport you to a place and a time. That's for sure.
Hmm.
Supports memory encoding, but really vivid imagery that simulates these senses in text can also do that. And like Claudia said, help you kind of dive into the story as if you're 3D in it. Um, so one form of imagery through figurative language would be similes. Your notes made me laugh so hard. So similes are a literary device, this figurative element, where a comparison is drawn, and usually in that comparison, the author uses the words like or as to compare the two things. The comparison is meant to help you envision or experience or perceive this thing better, right? So side note from Professor over here is it doesn't every time you see the word like or the word as, it doesn't mean it's a simile because like in the Backstreet Boys song, As Long as You Love Me, that's just as in a different format. English is confusing. It's not as in its simile form. And I'm going to give you some examples now.
Oh, I gave like a how to create one just cuz. I got
Oh,
into it. I'm sorry. I went into teacher mode.
we're going to do that. Let's give a model first, and then we'll scaffold.
Okay.
So I like that you pulled Stitches by Shawn Mendes. So just
Thank you.
like a moth drawn to a flame, oh, you lured me in, I couldn't sense the pain. So he says he's comparing himself to a moth drawn to the flame, meaning he couldn't get away from it. He was so innately, intrinsically drawn to the light, he had to be next to it, no matter what the consequence was.
Yes.
Beautiful comparison. I get it. He's infatuated with this person Stitches is about.
And he doesn't care about the pain that comes from it. And so to make a simile, you got to kind of think of a person, place, or thing and what it is that you want to say about it. And then think of a second person, place, or thing that shows a similar or the same characteristic. And so when you combine them, you are utilizing like in between the two things. And so you are really trying to focus on like the properties of these two subjects, so to speak, and how they relate. And so, again, just like Sean over here. Oh my goodness, hi, Mommy. Hi, handsome. I know you can't hear me. Oh, oh wait. I mean, you can. You can.
He definitely can hear through this. It's a little warm in here. I don't have the AC on. He's just on my leg, on me. I'm gonna get hives.
Oh no.
Can I
No.
try using your directions? Can I try to use your directions to make a simile?
Zwit.
My dog's body is as warm as lukewarm coffee.
Zwit.
So, yeah, not a great feeling, not a great temperature. And his warm sack of a furry body is now on my leg, and it's giving off that lukewarm, awkward heat. That's what I was trying to convey.
And
Success.
see how that simile really invoked something in me.
I knew it would. It's terrible temperature.
No, nobody wants that.
The author Talia Hibbert uses a lot of figurative similes in the story to really convey these multisensory like pulls that she wants you to experience. So, for example, Claudia, what was the quote from the book that we
Um,
liked?
Her voice was sharp and expensive, like someone had taught a diamond how to speak.
Ooh,
I
what did
loved
you get
that.
from that?
Oh, I loved it. Well, diamonds are hard. Very hard to crack, very hard to break, but they are beautiful. So I am sensing here that although, oh, and they are also expensive. And so with the hardness of a diamond, her voice also has those qualities of being sharp and expensive, but also beautiful. Because I think there are other things that would be sharp and expensive that aren't quite as beautiful as diamonds.
A knife, like a
Yeah,
like a master chef knife.
yeah, easily a kniff, you know? Like, I just, again, from the vibe that I got, although the person is stating such things like this, it still is telling me, I kind of dig it, even though I'm kind of like being shady, you know, shade.
Hmm. And I also think diamonds were a choice because of the hardness, the hard exterior,
Uh huh.
and how exclusive they are, you know. So
Valid.
we can revisit this quote in our next episode to kind of
Girl,
dig a little bit more into that. But anyway,
girl, you know
when
we
you get to
will.
this quote, when you're reading, do think upon this.
It's gonna come back.
So next up,
We got metaphors, baby.
yeah. So
Oh,
I remember when I was working with teenagers, and I'm sure you're
mm-hmm.
just gonna. This was harder than similes because similes have that clear like or as syntactic. The word is in there. The function word is in the sentence.
Mm-hmm.
This is just an author painting their imagery straight on in a sentence. There's no like or as being used. And I think a lot of students had a hard time understanding those comparisons. So
Yeah.
Claudia, can you teach us a little bit?
So with metaphors, I like to call them the flowery versions of similes. Because essentially it is still painting a picture, just like Christina said, right? And it's meant to carry the meaning of like one concept to like another by stating or implying something about them. And so there are different types of them, but we're just going to look at it from like a third person perspective, okay? And so it's, I think, a little bit easier to practice with like this really good example that I found on the googly goog, specifically on I think it's literarydevices.net. I included it down in the notes. But one way to practice is to start with the phrase life is and I am. So one of the examples that was put there is life is a canvas and I am a painter. And so what does that kind of, I'm sorry, you're chewing. What does that kind of like bring to you? Like what type of meaning?
So I'm seeing that life is just a big open blank canvas.
Mm-hmm.
So there are when you're born there are just infinite years of experiences and things that can be done to it, and that is what the paint will do. Strokes, color, shapes, forms, shadows, highlights. I don't know anything else about painting.
I love
Changing up the
that.
brush,
Right.
finger painting, smearing it with your finger. All those
Ooh, I
things
see what you did there.
are different life experiences that you slather on the canvas, which represents your life, and that's what it's representative of.
You got an A. Now, what if I flipped it? What if I said that life is paint and I am the canvas?
I would say that makes less sense.
Correct.
It's harder to explain because it would suggest that the person is comparing their life to being like a fluid paint, like, and then
This is not a real one. I just kind
it
of,
doesn't work as
it
well.
doesn't. It doesn't. And so that one I created because I was just like, you know what? There's a lot of paint and canvases. Let's just flip it. Let's see what happens. So really, I was just here out to fuck with you with that one because I also don't know what it means.
Yeah. The comparison was not as clear because the things being compared don't like have a commonality.
Yeah. Like if I wanted to make like a bullshit thing, I would say like I'm the blank canvas, like I am the one that is like clear and life just kind of takes its pull at me because it's like the paint, I don't know. Again, if I wanted to bullshit it, but I honestly just said, I wonder if it'll work if it flips. And it doesn't, which is fine.
We see a lot of metaphors in music all the time. I think, in poetry, you see a lot of figurative elements like this too.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes entire poems can be metaphors, just like the author will take two items they're comparing and then just write the entire poem in that, drawing those comparisons to one another.
As you can see, I was in a mood. I, there was another Backstreet Boys. Although I'm more of an NSYNC gal, you know.
Same.
Um, I don't know. Backstreet Boys, they just had metaphors and similes, or not similes, that
You
appeared
are,
like my fire.
but that's it. My one desire makes sense, right? It's not like as figurative.
Yeah. And so in this sense, I feel like he's saying like, you are what ignites me because fire ignites. You give me
Hmm.
also fire, fiery passion. You are my passion. You are, the big fiery ball in the sky. You're my sun. Ooh, it's getting Shakespearean out here, y'all. Julia is the sun.
Fire.
Ooh.
You are fire. You are my son. Yeah. So, like, I think the quote I picked actually doesn't really have context, so we can skip the quote from the book. But this author uses so many similes and metaphors in the story, just in the first half that we read, to really further along our immersion in the experience of the characters, and I love that.
Hell yeah.
So another thing that I noticed, which seems to be a super common trend, and I remember my mom talking about this all growing up, is uh
Excuse me.
the three sisters motif. that exists in literature. So in this case, Chloe, our main character, has two sisters, Danny and Eve. In the Ursula book, there were three odd sisters plus Circe, which was all that was made up anyway.
Don't.
There's three fates, right, in Greek mythology.
Don't forget about Macbeth, girl.
That was literally the next thing coming out of my mouth.
Got you. Sorry.
Um,
You know I love me Macbeth.
we could probably get even more three sisters in literature.
Oh,
King
100%.
Lear has three daughters.
Mm.
In real life, there were three Bronte sisters. What?
I forgot
That's
about
crazy.
that.
But why three? Why is it always three? Even freaking Harry Potter, Harry, Ron,
Deathly
Hermione,
Hallows and Deathly Hallows.
Hallows. But in general, why do we, Claudia? Why three little pigs?
Three little pigs.
They're just coming. Why three?
So if we're looking at numerology, because now that's what we do, and I'm on board. I love it. Why not? It adds another thing. So they're known as problem solvers. They come up with unique approaches to the issues of a routine life, which I feel essentially this makes sense with the story as it unfolds, at least from what I have seen thus far. And also, if we're thinking about lore, many times three is seen as balance. It's seen as like the perfect number. And it's the number of harmony, wisdom, and understanding. And I would say that that also low key applies to religion as well, because we have the Holy Trinity. We have the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost.
I forgot the greatest book of all time. I'm sorry.
Okay, calm down. It's not the greatest book of all time. It's the best-selling book of all time. Although, again, I am open to reading some of these stories because there's so much Old Testament tea in there. I'm just saying.
I'm so into it. So into that.
I'm just saying. Again, we frequently talk about it at work, way more than we did in my religiously affiliated school that I worked at. But which again, no shade. I'm just saying amongst coworkers, it's very funny.
It's an auspicious number.
What?
Historically, it's associated with paganism too, which is honestly not that surprising, knowing there's a Holy Trinity, and the roots of the monotheistic religions. But in lore, in all this pagan uh lore, it's the number of harmony, wisdom, and understanding. I mean, we say good things and bad things come in threes. It's
That's
just like,
true.
you
That's
know,
true. Oh,
um,
but also
and sun,
I'm
moon, and earth.
Earth, Wind, and Fire.
I mean,
Although they are missing an element, it's fine.
yeah, they tried.
You know what? Earth, Wind, and Fire out here in September. Do you remember? No. But also, I had like a because I just thought of Age of Aquarius when they say harmony and understanding. Clearly, there was no wisdom involved in the Age of Aquarius.
Definitely not. No offense.
Listen, I have some wisdom. It comes and goes as it pleases, but she's there.
Yeah, and I think the reason why in pagan lore and stuff, the number is usually represented by three women or three female associated energies. You can think of it as the three stages of femininity too: maiden, mother, crone.
Oh,
So
solid. I like it.
balance, Balenciaga.
Oh my god. It's
So
giving
yeah,
life cycle. Ooh.
is giving life cycle. So we will explore Chloe and her two sisters and their dynamic, I think, in the book club discussion episode, and we'll revisit
Hell
this
yeah.
to see if there is a reason, Talia Hibbert chose to give us three sisters in this story. Aside from the fact that this is a series, but we'll deal with that later.
Yeah, I think the other two sisters have their own book.
Yeah, but like, why three when you could have seven, like Harry Potter? So
I'm
TBD.
crying. Or eight movies. Who knew? Not I. Anyway,
Yeah, 2 + 2 is 5. 7 is the same as 8. 7, 8, 9.
Listen, when the maths, it really maths, But
All right. All right.
I'm sorry.
So that's, I think, our auspicious numerology for the day.
We tried.
Yeah. So uh I guess jumping into the genre of this book, we talked a little bit before about genre, which is like the how the heck do you describe? I use genre as a descriptor.
How
Genre
dare
is
you?
like the category of
Yeah.
a story.
Sometimes not everything falls into one category, just as humans. Because why settle for one category when you can be all of the categories? That might be a hot mess, especially when we get into like historical versus contemporary. But you know what? You figure it out.
I was literally just gonna say that. But yeah, so last month we talked a little bit about whether or not Cerulean Sea was fantasy or fiction. We settled on fantasy because it has common features of fantasy, which are like magical beings,
Mm-hmm,
made
mm-hmm.
made up lands, made up
Yes.
places.
Ah,
Um, so what the a genre's category will be defined by common traits that the story has with other stories in that category, which makes sense. Just like a
correct.
dog will always be a dog and a cat will always be a cat because they have specific biological attributes that create that species.
This
But
is true.
a
Except in
French
cat
bulldog,
dogs.
girl, what Claudia was saying was within one genre, there could be subtypes of a genre too. So maybe you get a little bit more specific, and then there will be really specific attributes within that category to create a whole subtype. And why do we have all these? Because if you like something, you want more of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we got 8 Harry Potter movies, right?
Because the math.
And we really wanted 8 movies. We wanted of all the books, we wanted Deathly Hallows to be 2 movies long. I wanted that hour and a half of hiking through the forest.
It's giving Lord of the Rings. Get out of my face.
English teacher, professor.
Yes. Yeah.
What
Yeah.
makes a romance novel? A romance novel. Why is this book going to be? What should our friends look out for within this book?
I mean, first of all, love. There will be something that is usually um, it, between two characters, maybe more. You never know. And there will almost always be some sort of emotional, satisfying, optimistic ending. When at least if we're talking about a singular book, if we're talking about maybe like a whole series, debatable because cliffhangers are cute. Um, but typically, those are the two major things that we are looking for. Um, and in these, we also have tropes, if you will.
Yes. Uh
I don't know if you want to jump to tropes like that
that's
quickly.
fine. We don't need to have all those genres.
Although I do have a
I
fun
feel like
fact. A contemporary fiction would be, in terms of literary critics, they say that it's written between the 1990 and the present.
oh God, so we're contemporary still then.
Technically. So technically, I think Harry Potter would fall under contemporary fantasy, young adult.
Got it. So this is like where you have movies that are like period pieces, right? Like movies have genres, TV shows have genres. It's about the what makes it a historical period piece, right? Not that period at the end of a sentence. Um, so I think for this book, I would probably say it is. I mean, we didn't finish it yet, so maybe not. We'll discuss what the genre is later.
We'll categorize her later, It's too
Yeah, and
early to
like
categorize her.
for everyone out there, like why put things in boxes? Why give classifications and labels? Because humans are predisposed to categorizing things. It's just how our
Unfortunately.
brains work. Yeah. So the important thing is you can see outside of that. But the importance of just like the Dewey Decibel, oh my god, decimal system in libraries. If you like Western novels, you want to know where all the Western novels are, right? So you're going to go and read all of those because you like them. If you have to figure out what you like what it's called, you're never going to find it because it's not categorized that way. So frustrating. Also, please don't like Western novels. Just don't. So tropes. Speaking of cringe. So the word trope, I think we hear a lot, and it's on like TikTok stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
Tropes are plot devices or themes used within
Yes.
some kind of novel genre that give a recognizable starting point to the story, that you'll be able to recognize right away as the reader. And this will be like, oh, this is the type of book that I like. So romance novels are the biggest culprits. There are different types of romance tropes that will occur within different romance novels. And, some people just really enjoy forbidden love stories. I'm one of them. That's my personal favorite romance trope. The more difficult it is for you to get there, the better my journey is with you, right? And then for me, it's always a surprise if it ends in tragedy because I really like to punish myself. So then it is no longer a romance when somebody dies.
I mean, the second that there's a death, unless
It's
they're
over.
already dead or immortal,
Right.
I
Facts.
it automatically becomes a tragedy. Could be a romantic tragedy, but a tragedy nonetheless.
Yeah. Yep. So, there are so many different romance novel tropes. I mean, do you want? We can save this for the next episode too, if you want, because I don't really know.
um
We didn't finish it yet.
yeah, no, that's fine. We can definitely save this. And so with tropes, because we need to save some cute little topics to talk about um during the actual book club day. Um it Tropes are very important, especially in romance novels, because again, it gives that starting point. It gives something that is recognizable. You also see it a lot in movies and in TV as well. Um, Sometimes, again, that's all I'm going to say because we're going to talk about it next time.
Big facts. Oh, I thought I was muted this whole time. Did you hear me like shuffling around? Sorry.
Not too much, honestly. You weren't that bad.
We mentioned that tropes usually encompass the theme of the story. From what we can gather so far, I think there are some very important themes that this book is humorous. There are some funny parts to it. There are some very real parts to it. The main character does experience a lot of suffering, and she doesn't
Mhm.
always want to talk about it. But she's chronically thinking about living a full life, and she feels limited by her chronic illness, which we will describe in a second. Um, but a huge theme is the death of something, a rebirth of something else,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, and oftentimes you will see death being utilized as that representation, not necessarily like an end, like yes, an end to something, but also it's kind of like one of those, not to be trite and corny, but like when one door closes, another one opens, or a window open, whatever the hell the thing is. But you know the one, the cliche.
I just
Oh,
throw people out of windows, so I don't really know.
that's valid. Honestly, they probably deserve it anyway. Unpopular opinion.
Defenestration.
And they let us teach children.
Girl. Back to theme.
Back to themes. And so even when like you think about this is related, I promise, with dreams and dream interpretations. Many times, if you panic that you are dreaming about death, like someone dying, you dying, whatever, and every time, like it's happened to me, I look it up and I'm like, what does it mean to dream about death? And oftentimes it will come up as rebirth, some sort of restart is coming. And so when I was going through certain points in my life that I did dream of death, I'm not trying to be witchy or anything because, I'm a wife, so I can't be a witch. Um, I would often, I
No.
said what I said. Ooh, only the real fans will know. Only the real fans will know. But yeah, oftentimes when I was going through like those kinds of moments, I would have like a death related dream, and it was oftentimes a moment of like rebirth. Oftentimes in my I feel like I said oftentimes a lot right now, my bad. But usually synonyms, um it was relating to careers and shifting things, and I've shifted a bit. In a good way though, in a good way.
I love that.
Another item that we need to talk about in terms of themes is like reasserting control within your life and within a life that is otherwise ruled by an illness or an outside something, whether it's, you are experiencing that illness like directly or indirectly, um as we will see with one of the other characters. And so with that in mind, with these invisible and visible illnesses, there is an aspect of life that is ruled by that. And, there is some sense of needing to reassert the control that one has over that. And I feel like low key, I am in this sense, in this moment, kind of like able explaining. I don't know how to because listen, it's a sensitive topic.
I'm screaming.
It's a sensitive topic, and I don't ever want to come off as I am being that person that is like telling you about what it is that you're going through, because that's not me. That's not how anything should be handled in any way, because people have their own individual experiences.
We do come from a place of privilege when it comes to ability, both physical
Mm-hmm.
and mental health and cognitive. So, we can read these stories and interpret them and connect it to ADA, and feel like we can be champions. But at the end of the day, it's down to the experience of our main character and the author, that we
Correct.
are trying to share and spotlight.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so this book was absolutely one of the themes is going to be, our main character is living with this chronic pain. And in the beginning, you'll see that is what she's dealing with, and that's all she really deals with, until she kind of has this desire to reassert some other types of power in other parts of her life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so we keep dancing around these two terms with chronic illness, invisible illness, and I think we do need to kind of like put some definitions to them, just in case.
Yeah, let's do that. That's a good idea.
Just in case.
What's the difference between the two terms?
So essentially, a chronic disease or a chronic illness would broadly define like any conditions that are lasting a year or more and require more ongoing medical attention, or it limits activities of daily living, or even both. Um, so, yeah.
Yeah, and activities of daily living can be anything from brushing your teeth, putting your clothes
Mhm.
on, to taking the train, to going to the supermarket, so on and so forth. It could be anything seemingly tiny to us could be vast to somebody dealing with barriers to accessing that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then when we get to invisible illnesses, they are typically considered medical conditions that do not have any sort of physical or visible symptoms that can be observed. Um, and so, because of the lack of like outward manifestations of illness, many of these conditions can go undiagnosed for years. And so, some that would fall under this would be like IBS, lupus, Crohn's disease, ADHD, or anxiety, um, and even heart disease, especially again, if it's the way that it kind of like transpires, again, it's inside. How are you going to know?
The population of individuals who deal with invisible illness, it goes undiagnosed, but it also could go misdiagnosed for years of their
Correct.
lives, because doctors are often looking to treat symptoms and not humans, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
We're all trying to move away from that in healthcare, taking more of a person centric. I also just want to point out that folks who are dealing with these years of trying to be taken seriously by medical
Mm.
professionals, this is a marginalized group of people. Women's health is notorious for this.
Oh my God.
So, from PMDD to endometriosis to just hormonal imbalances, like all of these things, people who present or biologically have those hormones, are experiencing, and doctors just solve it with a pill or just don't believe the pain,
Mhm. Because they
or
can't see it.
so it's very hard, or from those who are brave to share their stories, it is quite an experience to live with an invisible illness that a lot of people don't believe you when you say
Mm-hmm.
you have it.
Mm-hmm.
Which brings us into talking about pain and pain management. So our main character, Chloe, in our book, she lives with fibromyalgia, which essentially is a chronic, long-lasting pain disorder. It causes fatigue and trouble sleeping. Her body and the body of anyone experiencing fibromyalgia um, has atypical pain perception processing.
Mm-hmm.
So that means consider like when you were a kid and maybe you saw the stove for the first time and you went to slap the fire. Right away, you felt pain because your body was like, don't touch that. Your
Mm-hmm.
body's pain receptors, the sensory neurons that lead up to your brain, were like, danger, danger, danger. So, in a body with atypical pain processing, either those receptors are off or they're on high alert all the time. So, everything
Mm-hmm.
is painful, which we see with Chloe in this book. Anything she does that is out of her normal day-to-day routine is leads to very dysregulated pain
Mm-hmm.
perception in her body.
Yeah, and there is no cure for fibromyalgia, but there are ways and means of like managing and treating these symptoms. Some of which include or may include, because again, everybody's different, a combination of exercise or like other types of movement therapies like physical therapy, a chiropractor, and acupuncture, even some psychological or behavioral therapy, also sleep therapy would be something that might cover it. I just never conceptualized that idea of like chronic pain would affect your sleep, and like maybe that's dumb on my part, but that's that's just something that never came to mind.
Keeps you up at night.
In addition to those, medications would also be helpful. So birth control, because it would ease any sort of like PMS symptoms or even any painful periods, muscle relaxers, and even antidepressants to control hormones. And the reason why I bring up birth control is because with fibromyalgia, women are more affected than men. Although men can also get it, anybody can, but the experts, the doctors,
The
practitioners,
CDC.
the CDC found that more women were diagnosed with fibromyalgia rather than men.
For all the symptoms that Chloe goes through, she tends to mention that she takes pretty hard narcotics to not feel the pain. So just trigger warning.
Mm,
These are prescription drugs that she takes, at least so far. Her pain management team, her doctor, they have prescribed this, and these are the things she does when she is in such unbearable pain she cannot function.
right.
Kind of just jumping off of that. So Chloe is a young woman. She's like 26 or 24 or something.
I
I don't know. She's under
I
30.
feel like really, I thought she was 30.
Oh, maybe she's 30. I don't know.
I
She's a
got
young
you.
adult.
I got you. Keep going.
She has two sisters. She's got a grandma on the scene and her mother. And all this to say, when a you are somebody who has a loved one who deals with chronic illness or invisible illness or a lot of pain. She's 31.
Mm-hmm.
She's 31. She's a young woman. She's got a lot of caregivers in her life, and they really do give care to her.
They do.
Caregivers' burden is the multifaceted strain that caregivers might experience from caring for their loved one who is experiencing some kind of disability or difference in ability status than they are. And some elements that contribute to caregivers' burden or burnout are disruption of family time, loss of sleep, anxiety, other mental health concerns, financial strains, decreased work productivity, coordinating care between caregivers. So, like, who's on this
Mm-hmm.
time, who's on this time, having to be the one to get answers to your questions about treatment and baseline changes. Baseline meaning if your loved one has a decline in their health, you
Mm-hmm.
have to figure out what to do, and that's just some. Not to mention maybe relationship changes between partners, between family members, because
Mm-hmm.
of everyone congregating to try to care for this person.
Yeah, and I mean, not to get too into it right now, but there are different types of caregivers. And even with the two that you mentioned here, they have two very different styles in terms of how they give that type of care. just circling back to the caregiver's burden, it is a lot to carry. It, to think of it as this is still a life that you are dealing with, that you are helping and exist.
I mean, even in practice with my patients, I never count out the caregivers because they're the ones who will help the patient get to where we
Mm-hmm.
want them to be or where they want to be. But I also have to take care of those caregivers because they're
Mm-hmm.
going through it.
Yeah. And even something as small as asking, like, hey, how are you today? And sometimes it's hard to have them focus on how they are doing. Even if you ask the direct question of how are you today, oftentimes I have found they will center that question around the person they are caring for, and I'm like, oh, that's great about so and so, but again, how are you? Like, I love hearing that so and so is doing great. Many times it's hard for them to kind of grapple with that simple question.
And sometimes when you ask that simple question, how are you? It'll click and then you will support them through their story.
Yeah, or even if it's a simple I'm fine, it's just I don't want to talk about it. That's as far as we will go. Also respect that.
So we're talking a lot about marginalized groups, historically marginalized individuals. Our main character, in addition to having an invisible illness, she's also a Black woman living in the UK. But I think
Mm-hmm.
in America, we strive to be like calling out things like microaggressions, which I'm going to describe in a second,
Mm-hmm.
and prejudice comments and kind of racist humor. Just be nice. Like, why do we have to make a joke at others' expense? In other places, I think this alertness to race relations is it's present, but it's not as at the forefront.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if that tracks. However, in this book alone, in the first half of the book, we've experienced Chloe's dance with microaggressions.
Mm-hmm.
So microaggressions are defined as everyday, subtle, sometimes intentional, sometimes not. Um, Interactions that communicates some kind of bias towards a marginalized group. So in her case, we had a couple of instances with race microaggressions that were made towards her. And I'm certain we're going to encounter some related to her invisible illness and her pain as well. If you live with an identity that is marginalized, that means the privileged group in that scenario might have these internal biases that cause them to say dumb things to you.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Now,
Period.
but quick question. Could microaggressions also exist within one's race?
Within the same, sure. And even like with ability, like there's always
Mm-hmm.
internalized, you grew up in your culture. We've talked about implicit bias a little bit on the podcast before.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, I work with a lot of adult patients who've had strokes or brain injuries, or they fall into neurogenic diseases like Parkinson's. So their lives change a lot as they get older,
Of course.
where they have to rely on others. And maybe somebody who used to be a lawyer can no longer litigate at all,
Right.
right? I often see patients talk trash about their current situation, and it's part of my job to try to get them through that, counsel them through it,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a life change, just a new way to approach your life and to live your life. But that internalized kind of loathing comes from the schema you had about the disability you now have,
Yeah.
right? And similarly, within different ethnic groups, there might be colorism, stuff like that, that exists that you are just exposed to while growing up, and maybe can think outside the box around as you get older, to try to dismantle those
Mm-hmm.
oppressive thoughts.
Those learned oppressive thoughts, because many of these microaggressions, these stereotypes, things of that nature could stem from like what you grow up around too.
Yeah, your culture.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Words were not finding me.
Yeah, I mean, growing up in New York City, both of us, we have a wild view of what the rest of America's like, right?
Mm-hmm. It's true.
you
We
know,
do have, I would say, many biases of certain areas of the US.
And I will be the first to say my whole very uncalled for comment about don't read westerns was rooted in that.
Oh yeah.
That comes from me thinking that the rest of this country is the Wild West with tumbleweed and prejudice and horseback riding
Mm-hmm.
because that's part of my cultural schema that I grew up with. But being able to pause and reflect and recognize I was being very mean, and I'm sorry to everybody who likes westerns. Not every place is that cinematic Hollywood Wild West.
Many would also say that New York City is like the Wild Wild West. Oh my God, simile.
Whoa, full circle.
Yeah.
Like full circle twice. Double axle.
Oh, I'm out here Venn diagramming. Crazy.
Wow.
Crazy.
What can you do if you face a microaggression in real life?
I so based off of what I have read within this book, one way is to face it head on, asking clarifying questions like, "What do you think? Why do you think that?" Or, you know, maybe even like, "Where did you hear that?" Like, just clarifying questions to kind of see where that person is at. Um, some people will use it as a teachable moment. I think that kind of like stems maybe from the clarifying questions, or even just straight up walking away, depending on how like situations go. That again might call to be the best course of action. You never know.
Well said. I think that's great. Asking those clarifying questions puts the onus back on the person who passed the microaggression, and they have to now really quickly think about what they said, and right away they realize what they said was inappropriate. And then you can
Mm-hmm.
see them trying to scramble or rephrase. Once in a while, remember you mentioned that person I used to work with who I always come back
Yeah,
to
that
with stuff like
person.
this,
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
other colleague. So
Mm-hmm.
every once in a while you'll run into somebody who just doesn't get it. And I always tell my like graduate students, you will run into people who don't think like you at all, and they're not ready to kind of pause and reflect and reset.
Mm-hmm.
Provide as much education and advocacy as you can.
Yeah, because honestly, when it comes to certain things, some people don't want to learn a new way. Some people don't have that innate capability of introspection, or it's not
Yes.
as developed as it is in others. There still are some people that maybe aren't as open-minded as you would imagine that they would be.
Part of what folks have to combat is their confirmation bias,
Mm-hmm.
which is basically the way you interpret new information that you receive is testing the beliefs and understanding you have the world around you. So if something is challenging your worldview, it can be very scary,
Mm-hmm.
and really, really hard to stop and do that reflection because you don't want to be wrong. Humans never want to be wrong.
No.
So, this is a crisis I found with a lot of folks that I've worked with just in passing. They'll have this existing hard shelled schema
Mm-hmm.
about things, and they are just not able to break past the confirmation bias that they have on it. And
Yeah. Hell, even in education, it's crazy to, you know, think that that's possible, but even in education. And so like I like that there is diversity training, diversity and inclusion training within at least New York City jobs. I don't know for a fact that it's like a federal mandate to do. I just know from the state view it is.
good question. Let me see.
I would imagine just like many things, it varies from state to state how maybe it's presented. Am I wrong?
So, diversity training that specifically addresses sex bias was made law in 1964 by the Civil Rights Act. But
Solid.
it's chiefly discrimination and harassment prevention, which is
Hmm.
why like sexual harassment trainings are mandatory at every I have to do them
Yeah.
annually at all the jobs I work.
Oh, samesies.
Otherwise, not a federal thing.
I
It's
think
a highly encouraged thing.
Yeah. So I think I forgot what maybe it was this. My coworkers and I think looked into this about yes, it was this because
Oh, I know something too.
oh, because there was an article that we pulled up that it showed like the United States and like you hovered over it to see like what were the mandated like work trainings. So it is
Love
state by
it.
state. And there were many not to help fuel your opinion of westerns, but there was a lot of midwest southern western states that we were just like, are you serious? And then other southern states that we were like, yeah.
Mm.
um just based off of what we're hearing in the news and all of that.
Mm.
So I'm sorry, kind related tangent though, but
It is. It's called Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, DEI, I think, training.
I think you
And
are correct.
organi organizations will have a DEI team now, and if they have one, you can bet you're getting some training and stuff like this.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so there is a shifting legal landscape about it because there's so much prejudice in the world.
Because I think it's dependent on whether or not that state has diversity, equity, and inclusion laws.
Mm.
That I think it's that I think that's what it was. I think we were looking into laws and then we were like, "Oh, if they have a law, then they would definitely have to reinforce it with training or something like that."
And apparently, industries within a state might require. So,
Mhm.
like, for example, in New York State, teachers, teaching and speech, we fall into education and healthcare. In New York State, education and healthcare have mandated DEI
Mhm.
trainings.
Many corporations like Starbucks, for
Mm,
example, they do.
yeah. So you can look up by state DEI mandates to see if your state or in America, obviously, requires DEI training and then in what domains and if that makes sense. And if you work in an industry that should have it, get up and make noise.
All this to say, these are some topics, many of the topics that will be covered within this work of literature that we are reading.
Hmm.
And the reason why we're spending time talking about this is because they are important to have that pre knowledge going in so that, again, it helps you in understanding the perspective of the not only the narrator, but all of the characters involved.
Yeah, it's a very complex web of relationships in a romance story. So I
Damn.
think there's plenty to think about while you're reading along with us, and there's plenty that we're going to dish on in our final episode on this book. On our last episode on this book at the end of the month of July.
We should probably do sign offs and announcements, ma'am. So just you're going to do the sign off this time.
Okay.
So, two announcements that are coming up. We are posting the experiences of people who live with visible and invisible disabilities throughout the month of July to pay homage to Disability Pride Month, to give that space, to give those moments to highlight. And quite frankly, it takes a lot for someone to share their stories. So don't forget to show those some love. Um, and the next episode, just like we keep saying, we will be discussing in detail Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. And we might have a special guest, a baddie, coming with us, the one that recommended this to us. So keep an eye out.
Yep. We will also be talking a little bit about some excerpts from Disability Visibility by Alice Wong. That is also a text available to you if you'd like to read and kind of increase your awareness for communities that are marginalized and dealing with a variety of different kind of disabilities perceived or experienced. So, DM us if you're interested in any of these things and we will get you started. Thank you
Yes.
so much for listening and joining us all the time. We will see you on our YouTube, on our Insta, on our TikTok. Hopefully you're listening to us on Spotify, but if not, you might be on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, or Amazon Music. We're everywhere. If you're there, so are we. So follow us if you didn't already. Okay? We see you. And we know you see us, so just like connect. We want to be a family. If you listen to us on Spotify, come on YouTube and watch because we have really weird facial expressions. Like, just come through.
And you know what else we have? Overuse finger
Memes.
guns.
Oh, yeah. And memes.
That too.
Meme queen. But yeah, thank you so much. And we look forward to sharing our book review with you at the end of the month.
Thank
Happy
you.
July.
Woo!
Bye.
Bye.